Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Book Talk Podcast. My name is Claire Harris, and today I'm talking to author Roy Taylor. Roy Taylor writes novels that outline his observations and perceptions of people and their behaviour patterns, which he does very cleverly in his in his intuitive novel, The Power of the Persona. Do you know who you really are? Or his new venture, a fiction novel, African Sunsets, a settler's story. A book formulated from many actual experiences encountered by his family in Africa. Today we'll be talking about his book, African Sunsets, A Settler's Story. Hello, Roy. Thank you for coming to talk to me on Book Talk Radio Club.
Hello, Claire. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. The story is based upon a young couple who meet in Scotland while both are in college. He is Malcolm and she is Liz. Malcolm has a dream to complete his brewing studies in Edinburgh at the famous Heriot-Watt University, then immediately emigrate to Kenya in East Africa, a colony ruled by the Crown under His Majesty King George V. Well, that sounds interesting. Would you like to tell us a bit more? But not too much. We don't want to spoil it for the listeners.
I'll give you a little bit.
Okay.
To create the picture, in those days, my grandfather was one of the very first settlers to Kenya. And so his experience was related to me many times as a young man, and I learned the stories. But basically, the Kenya colony, as it was a somewhat strictly ruled colony. The British ruled with strength and determination. I think it caused a lot of trouble with the locals often because their dominance was powerful. They didn't really take much to anybody who would oppose them. But for a settler going out there, it was a very unique experience because there was a comparatively low white population there. And once one stepped off the boat and arrived there, it would be basically on your own and a difficult situation. In my book, I alluded to the fact that our settlers were greeted by representatives from the government house and taken there to their hospitality for a few days, because I felt that sort of gave a picture of what people lived like in those days. It was a very interesting lifestyle, and I feel very privileged to have grown up, at least some of my childhood, living there, because it'll never be repeated, and they're memories that stay with you forever. The king and his people had a job. Their job was to acquire wealth for the crown, and so what their mandate was to take land, or at least take ownership of land. And their biggest thing was to take ownership in the rich lands of the Rift Valley up country, and utilize them for British purpose and settlers' purpose. But the Africans suffered for that, and particularly the Kikuyu tribe, which was the coastal African tribe, they took a great hit on their land holdings, and it caused strife. And a great deal of strife to follow, which I alluded to in my book as I go forward. But yes, an interesting time for everybody.
Sounds like it. Tell me about Malcolm. What kind of man is he? What's his character like?
Well, this is a fellow who grew up in England, in Lancashire. In my stories, I must allude to the fact, and I did in the book, but all the stories I tell, almost every single one of them is based on fact. They're not fabricated, actually. And so I used characters, but I changed the characters because I didn't want to embarrass or to cause any family members that may still live any embarrassment. Not that there is any, but basically I wanted to keep it that way. But Malcolm's a lad who grew up. He aspired to become a brewer. So he went to the world's greatest brewing college, the Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, where I was born, actually. And he studied there. And, of course, the antics that these students got up to studying beer was quite amazing, you know.
I can imagine.
I remember my dad telling stories of how they used to get on a horse-drawn wagon with a big barrel of beer on board, and all these guys would sit on board and drink beer as they rode around Edinburgh. So, there's all kinds of fun stories that go with that. And as I started the book, I didn't want to jump straight into Africa. I jumped into how Malcolm, as a character, developed in his studies, and I wanted to bring his future wife into the story. So in doing that, I needed to stay in Edinburgh a little bit longer than I originally planned, but I felt it enhanced the story. And of course, they go to this, or at least he ends up going to this wonderful, wonderful historic hotel. And from there, we go forward. Liz, his future wife, she's a character in herself. She's a little woman, very, very petite. Another Lancashire girl. She came from Warrington. Malcolm came from St Helens. Both of those towns are fairly close by, and so it was a point of melding, I guess. They had something in common.
Can you, at the time of George V, that was the late Queen Elizabeth II's grandfather, wasn't it? Can you paint a picture of the settlers' lives at the time? I know you touched on it a bit before, but can you go into it a bit deeper?
I can. What happened in those days, because of the low population of white people, was that there was a bond, if you want to call it that, amongst the settlers and the British hierarchy, if you want to call it, that came from London to rule or to exercise power. So there was a bonding that took place between the British government and the settlers. And on many occasions, that bonding crossed into a more social atmosphere where settlers were invited to be entertained and enjoy the ripe rewards of being friends with the king. The king's goal was to basically keep a peaceful state, even though the actions didn't always encourage it. But it was a time, and we look back today. There's a lot of people that have criticism of the concept and everything, but I look back to those early days, and to be honest with you, in the early days before the Africans decided they wanted it back, it was a place of peace. There was this discomfort, but what I will say is that when these British settlers went out there and the government was ruling it, the African people as a whole, and I'm not talking about every single one of them, but the African people as a whole were primarily made up of primitives who were tribally bonded. They were tribal men and women, and they lived a tribal lifestyle. So as we see people today, it's a completely different situation. And I think a lot of people mischaracterize that, because it wasn't like that in those days. It was just acceptance that everybody was different and they all had their stations in life.
Along the way, the wildlife population make occasional visits, and the indigenous tribal natives too. What kind of wildlife, and who are the indigenous tribal natives?
We had every kind of wildlife you can imagine. In the early days when I grew up at my grandparents' home with my mum and dad. My dad was working in my grandfather's brewery. And to be honest with you, the brewery scene was all part of the story because it was so much part of our life. And I created Malcolm, but really the true early settlers were my grandparents and my mum and dad behind them. But when we used to go to bed at night, the windows would have 2-inch steel bars welded to them.
Right.
And the windows would be open. Air conditioning was kind of a non-issue. And it was very, very hot there at times. And sure. At night, you'd be woken up with a hyena pack outside the window. You'd hear lions grunting. not very far away. And we even had elephants that would come through from time to time. So, and of course, an understatement, but we were riddled with snakes. Snakes was one of my deepest memories because I used to wake up with nightmares of them in the night because we had so many of them. And we had an anti-snake regimen going where the African gardeners would be paid 1 shilling, which was about the equivalent of a quarter, to bring a snake head. Any day they brought the snake head, they'd get a shilling for the head. So they were in charge of mitigating snakes en masse, but there were so many of them. And I have to say it, without almost any exception, almost all of them were deadly. And so we all had to tread carefully and be aware of it, and made the difference. The other side to the story is that the wildlife also included monkeys, and it included chameleons and all kinds of wonderful creatures, and cockamanders, and all these creatures existed in our back garden, and it was a truly marvelous, wonderful life.
It sounds like it. So who are the indigenous tribal natives?
I'm sorry?
Who are the indigenous tribal natives?
Oh, well, the primary tribal nation in East Africa, or particularly down that East Coast, were the Kikuyus. Their particular characteristic was these were very tall men and very lean, tall people. They were proud people, and they were by far the majority of the tribes people out there. But we had many, probably in the range of 15 to 20 different tribes that lived in the area.
Right.
And they lived to tribal customs. They had a witch doctor. They had huts, mud huts that they lived in, and it was all part of life. So they lived their life uninterrupted before the British came. I guess I have to be fair, and there must have been some upheaval for them with them appearing on the scene, and unfortunately, like any occupier, I think the British took their opportunities to try to commandeer the country in their own way for their own benefit. I won't say that there was huge amounts of cruelty that people would have you believe. I think obviously there must have been some dominant behavior, but as a general rule, the Africans were a very friendly people to us. I remember many encounters with Africans as a boy, and they were beautiful people, happy, nice people to meet and to sit and enjoy as a kid, very much so.
Let's talk a little bit about you now, Roy Taylor. The book is based, as you said, upon many experiences from your past and your family's rich heritage in Kenya. Your parents left with you and your brother at the time of Kenya's independence from Britain. So what do you remember about your childhood there? Just give us a little idea.
I remember a great deal, actually, for saying. You wouldn't think so, but I live with those memories every day of my life in a different way, because when you compare life today here, I live in California, and you compare the life that we had there, it's a completely different life. We lived a life that was gifted in so many ways. It was a good life. It was a very abundant life. To give you an example, and people will cringe maybe, but we had a houseboy, an African who was the house master. He would take care of the home. His wife would. We called her a Bibi. And then there was two Shamba boys, which are the gardeners, and that was what was our life. So my parents employed them. They were paid a stipend every week, and they were provided accommodation, and they were provided food. And the real problem, as I alluded earlier, is that a lot of times the transition from being an African living in Africa to the British arriving and so on was that modern lifestyle came with it. And so I remember my dad getting frustrated in times when he'd pay the African houseboy his wages, and then the guy would disappear for 2 or 3 days while he went to the store and drank beer for the weekend, and he'd show up on a Monday ready for work again. So it was a matter of learning to live with each other, and they were wonderful people, wonderful people. I remember when we left Africa, the houseboy and his wife came to us and begged us to take them with them. They wanted to come with us. We were we were a close family, and in our different ways. So it was quite an experience. But I carry the memories of what I write now, and I'm trying to put them to paper.
After meeting your wife and starting a family, you became a very successful estate agent, at one time owning an agency with your brother in the west of Cornwall. One day you got your hands on a copy of the LA Times Sunday edition. In it was a story about a lady who had become a realtor in LA and had become $1 million club member in just 6 months. So what happened next, Roy? Tell us what you did.
Well, a certain amount of misunderstanding across that one, because the $1 Million Club over in America is $1 million worth of real estate. My interpretation at the time was that she'd made $1 million in earnings. My wife and I were washing up dishes at the sink one day in Cornwall, and I alluded to her about the story of this woman, and we talked about it. And I said, would you like to go to America, maybe? Because I was selling houses in England at the time. I said, would you like to go to England? And she said, I don't know, maybe. And I said, well, we could go to Australia or Canada or somewhere else. And so we talked about it for a while. And that night, we made a decision that we were going to have a go at going to California.
Right.
And I said to her, we both agreed that if we both felt the same way the following morning, we'd give it a shot. So we got up the next morning, breakfast was on the table, and I said to my wife, well, did you think any more about what we discussed last night? And she said, yes. And I said, what do you think? She said, let's do it. So as of that decision, we decided to try and emigrate to California.
Right.
And you have to understand that at the time we did that, I had a remodeling job going on a 400-year-old cottage that had no staircase to the second floor, no bathroom installed, and the whole thing was a complete disaster. And we were making a decision to leave for California. Anyway, we did it, but the story just last little bit. We did it. We applied, and 13 months later, we got a letter from the British Embassy, the U.S. Embassy in London, saying you can come to California, but you have 45 days to get out. So I'm looking at the house and I'm thinking, well, I've done pretty good. We're nowhere near finished, and then we got to sell it. So we finished the house quickly, got it all done, and put it on the market. I sold it, and 2 weeks before we were due to leave, the sale fell through.
Oh God!
And so it was like, oh my goodness. Well, I jumped on it quick, and we resold it, and we actually ended up in Los Angeles airport the day that the visa expired.
Oh my goodness!
And we got our visas to be in California. And I might add, the best thing we have ever done in our lives. It's been a wonderful experience living here. And I don't have any regrets about anything else, but California's been wonderful for us.
Is there anything you miss about England?
Yes, I do. Something that I have grown more and more fond of, I guess. You know, we went through the Queen's funeral the other day, and I have not had tears in my eyes since I was a kid. And as I watched that, I felt tears because I was very moved by the whole experience. And what it is I'm going to explain it as pride. The pride of the British system.
Yeah.
You cannot sit being a Brit and look at something like that or enjoy something like that in its right and not be proud of our heritage.
Exactly.
And I've always been a royalist, I must be honest, but I still reinforced it because of the wonderful, wonderful pomp and circumstance that goes with it. And that, not just the funeral, but the life in England. When I visited there several times since we left, not frequently, but a few times, I'd grown to enjoy the old houses, the manor houses, the life that goes with it, the pubs, just the English lifestyle.
Roy, sorry. Right, I'm going to have to hurry up because I'm running out of time here. Can we just go back to your book now? Would you mind?
Yes.
You obviously have a love of words. So what sets you out on the road of writing?
I just love doing it. It's something I've grown to. Look, I always wanted to write a book. It was going to be a cowboy book. Mm-hmm. And I ended up doing what I have done for no explainable reason. I just love doing it and plan to do a lot more.
I see you're already receiving some great feedback, including, what an exciting read. Having never been to Africa, I enjoyed the adventure. Interesting to learn about the original settlers and with their daily interaction of wildlife. I was moved by this story. Mr. Roy Taylor, next series, please. That's terrific. But what motivates you to write, the sales or the feedback?
Both. I would love to be a best-selling author. It would be a life's goal that I would thoroughly love. But the feedback is equally important to me. I love the feedback. And to be honest with you, I got a bit of a bum rap with Amazon because they downgrade your feedback the longer it's on. So I got 5 stars on every one I've ever had, but every time Amazon gets their hands on it, they drop it a notch.
Oh no!
Yes, and in all fairness, it's to do with how many books you sell. So, with COVID, I wasn't able to sell as many as I had started out doing, and they gradually have downgraded my ratings because of it. But not being critical, it's just the way they work, and we have to accept these things.
So, where can Book Talk podcast listeners purchase African Sunsets apart from Amazon, or is it only just on Amazon?
Well, actually, I made a decision recently. It can be bought on Amazon, obviously, but I can do it myself too. I thought I won't start a shopping cart per se because it's impersonal. What I thought was if anybody wants to email me, roy@africansunsets.org, and send me a request to buy one of the books, I'll sign one, and I will give them a signed copy with a discounted mailing of $1 equivalent, just to get it back to them, and I'd be happy to give them a personalized copy. I can't do it very easily any other way, so I thought I'll do it direct. And if anybody chooses to go that route, I'd love to communicate with them.
All right. Well, thank you, Roy. That was great. Good luck for the future. And thank you, everyone, for listening to Book Talk Podcast. Thank you very much, Roy.
Thank you, Claire.
Okay, now. Bye.
Bye.